This is KHOI 89.1 Story City Ames, and you're listening to I Am Able Iowa, where we discuss the ability and disability. I'm Nancy Baker Curtis, public school teacher, board president for the ARC of Iowa, and parent advocate. I'm your host for today, and I'm also joined by my co host, Zach Meekum, who comes to us from Allies and Advocacy. We're super excited for today's guest, Megan Hopper, who is a mother of two children. She's a special needs advocate, interior designer, and founder of the program Anchored Hearts Support Group. Megan, welcome to the I Am Able show. We're so excited to have you here today.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and I'd love to start by asking you a little bit about how you see the intersection of design, community, and inclusion in your work.
Yeah, so I think it really just comes down to just short summary because I can really get into the weeds about all of this. It has to do with how we all utilize space in the world, but then also physical spaces as well. And so that, is community, it's interior design, and then it's just inclusion as well, and making spaces for individuals with special needs or disabilities to just be able to exist in the normal world more easily. So that's kind of how I would summarize it.
Really cool. And I do think a lot about that as a wheelchair user that has to navigate a lot of different spaces. So my question for you, as an interior designer, how does your knowledge of disability impact your work as a designer?
Yeah, so I think I am tempted to look at it through both lenses all the time. When I go into a medical lobby, for example, how are things set up for someone with a physical disability or cognitive? And what could I change? And those are kind of the questions I go into every space just thinking about in my own head. And then obviously too through lived experience, just through having my son. And just knowing spaces he struggles in and spaces that he thrives in. In interior design school, they give us just a little snippet. That was one of the things that I like fought and fought to always bring it back to when I was going through school, because I did have my son at that point already. Just to say like, okay, how could I make this better for somebody with a disability? They did give us like, okay, if you had a wheelchair user, like how would you design this space? But yeah, just always trying to like take it a step further because they only do to a certain point in school. So yeah, and there are those professionals that study it heavily, and they, I think, become advocates as well just by default because they have to. But yeah, I mean, those are kind of some of the ways I think just I go about it in my normal day. I see it everywhere. I'm sure just like you do when you're using a space. You're like, man, I wish this was different.
And I think universal design is just good practice, right? It's not something that specifically when you walk into the Harkin Institute or even when I go into the building that I work at the school where I work, it's kind of an older building and there are so many things that I think, oh, I just wish they were different, right? Universal design is just that. It's good design for everyone. And I often say to my students, um, only some people can use the stairs. Everyone can use a wheelchair ramp. And how important that message is when we think about designing our spaces, right? Whether it's my classroom space, the way that I set up my furniture in my home for my non-ambulatory son or not independently ambulatory son, right? And just the things that Zach mentioned, being a wheelchair user, what are the things that help me be successful
Mhm.
in accessing a space, and what are the things that impede us from being able to utilize spaces?
Yeah, you
So
think with wheelchair users, for example, like another example of somebody who would benefit from the space is just like a mom with a stroller, you know? And so, like you said, when you design with someone with a disability in mind, it's better for everyone. Um, and I can't think of an example where it wouldn't be. So, the general population, when you ask them, like, hey, if I designed a space this way, most of the time they're going to be, responding with, yes, that'd be better for me too. Should we put a fence around a playground? Most parents would say, yeah, you should. So, yeah, I mean, that's another topic, another soapbox. But yeah, that's kind of how the design world and the disability world intersect, at least for me.
Yeah, I do a lot of digital design for my work, and that's kind of something that I'm always preaching is like accessible design is just good design, and like taking that extra time to be intentional about how are people going to utilize this space or this website, right? Inherently makes it better just because there's more consideration being done.
There's a lot in the geriatric world as well. When you talk about patients with dementia and things like that, we got into wayfinding a lot, which is something that is kind of cool if you ever go down that trail of how you can design a space using wayfinding. It's better for everyone. So it's, yeah. And digital is something that, I mean, I didn't experience a whole lot, but I did a little bit, have to consider when I create something, digitally, does it work, for everyone, not just the general population. So, yeah,
And I think what you said about wayfinding, I often think of signage and wayfinding being coupled together. I'm a passionate advocate for height adjustable adult size changing tables. That was my passion project through the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute. And it's something that I feel should just be a part of our building code, right? Just like buttons outside of doors. And oftentimes, what I discover is that places have had those sorts of expanded accommodations that go beyond the Americans with Disabilities Act. The problem is that they don't have them on their website under an accessibility tab that's designated for people to know where to go to look, or they don't have a stupid sign that helps you find your way. And it's so frustrating to know that there's this place that I've been visiting with my son for years, and lo and behold, they had exactly what I needed the entire time. I didn't have to go out to my car and change him in public,
yep.
right? I could have done it in privacy and protected his dignity and treated him with way more respect, and it's safer. So I think that you really tapped into something there, Megan.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room in the design world for advocacy. And yeah, it's like you said, physical disabilities, clear communication of where things are is so useful, but beyond that too, I think, like you said, putting it on a website is so helpful because when I, as a parent, am looking for, is this going to be successful for my son, or are we going to struggle with this event or this thing? Um, Having all the information ahead of time really helps. I mean, just like any anxious person when they go out to dinner, they want to know what the parking situation is. They want to know, like, is the menu online? Can I look ahead of time so that I don't feel rushed in the restaurant? These are things that are times 100 for people with disabilities. So yeah, gets back to the whole universal design point.
Can you explain to me maybe a time, maybe a time where it wasn't done so well, and then maybe a time where it was, where you felt like you and your child were accommodated by the layout of a, or whatever of a space?
For sure. One of my biggest examples that I've used is two very popular theme parks. So, if you take a trip to Disney, they do a lot for disability, and they're improving it all the time. But we encountered quite a few barriers with our son just while we were there that we weren't expecting. Things like differences in height requirements. Because he's on the autism spectrum, he jumps and he wiggles, and they couldn't get him to hold still long enough. And oftentimes they have to measure your height twice. And these are just things that, like, yes, they went to a certain point. They made it so we didn't have to wait in line. But then we encountered, a worker who maybe didn't know, that my son needed to jump around a little bit before you measure him, things like that. So we had at Disney some struggles there where, eventually he got to get on the ride, but it slowed everything down. And then when we went to Universal, it was just a very different experience. They were very aware at Universal, to another level, and we weren't really expecting that. But that was extremely pleasant. Even down to like the characters that we visited. Like my son got to meet Spider-Man, and it is a core memory for us because it was so wonderful. So that's a really big example. And as big as both of those companies are, they should be able to make accommodations. But yeah, that's a good question, actually. Yeah.
He's got tons of them. That's why we picked him to be the co-host. He's always got great things to say. Um, but Megan, you mentioned, and we kind of jumped right into the design aspect, but you've mentioned your son. So can you tell us a little bit more about your family and how you kind of got into this whole journey of being a parent advocate?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my husband and I have kind of always thought if we didn't ourselves end up with a child with a disability, that we would have chosen that at some point in our lives, through adoption or another avenue. Um, as newlyweds, I think we kind of romanticize the idea a little bit of like, oh, we're going to help someone, we're going to do something bigger. And then, so we had our daughter, 2017, and she was very typical in all the right ways. Early walker, early talker, just a delight, and still is. She does struggle with ADHD, and so when we had my son, it brought a lot of that to the surface. But the Lord has other plans. And so we had my son, and we thought for the longest time, like, so this was 2018, he was born. And as he developed, this is also COVID. And so a lot of it, we just were like, we don't know. It's typical autism symptoms, or, benchmarkers developmentally, like these are in the line with autism, but, COVID brought this whole different piece to it. So it took us a while to kind of get the answers that we needed and put a pin on exactly what was going on with him. We were also brand new to Iowa. We moved here from Colorado in 2020. So there was a lot of change in a short amount of time. But, I'm thankful for my husband in that time. He was staying home with our son and just picked up on a lot of things. The biggest being a speech delay. Where at about 18 months, he just had like a stall and was developing normally up until that point. And that's something that a lot of autism parents have commented on, something similar. They're either super hyperverbal or had a speech delay. So that was kind of our key kicker, where by the time we got the diagnosis, we had kind of pieced it together ourselves, along with other things he struggles with, like sensory processing disorder, to where we kind of knew what the answer was going to be going into it. And it felt good to get the answer, but we had been struggling for so long, that, it was just kind of like, okay, yep, this is the answer. Now we can go. We got the diagnosis, green light, let's go, let's get help, let's get resources. And that also was not the journey. So like I say, we have always kind of had a soft spot in our hearts for wanting to help people with disabilities. And it was given to us in a really strange and beautiful way, but is completely different than I would have thought it would have been too. So yeah, we're in a place now. My son is 6, still nonverbal, uses an AAC to communicate, is growing all the time, learning new things all the time. He spends half of his day at school and half at ABA. So we do a lot of time in the car. And then we do therapies as well, speech, OT. And then, yeah, he's learning and growing all the time, but it looks different from his peers. So that's been a journey in and of itself. And of course, being new to Iowa and getting the diagnosis, having, virtually no friends starting out, it was strange because we needed community, but yet we didn't have it yet. So yeah, we kind of went down a rabbit hole there for a minute, but that's the short version of it is that, we have a beautiful daughter and then a son that we just developed very differently and ended up here.
It's really interesting to me that you like something in you and your husband made you want to take care of a child with a disability, but then you also said it wasn't like you expected. Can you break that down for me a little bit?
Yeah, I think TV does a really good job of uh, tricking you into thinking what having a child with autism is like. And we were pretty specific too. We are like, we would love to have a child with autism. That is something, no movie or book or anything can prepare you for. And so, we had an idea of like what it was in our head, but it wasn't what we got. I'll put it that way. Yeah, I think, you hear about the examples of like, a savant or whatever, where it's just going to be somebody who is a prodigy in some way. And maybe struggles with things for sure. Like we wanted to come alongside a kid and say, hey, here's what you struggle with, and let's help you out. But we just, yeah, I would say we weren't expecting a non-speaking child to be the thing, because it's not talked about. And so, you have like your very public views of autism. A autistic individual that I sat down with, recently, he has his own podcast. It's called Juice with Jeff. If you have not heard of it, give him a listen. He's a local guy. He worded it like this: you need more acceptance, not necessarily more awareness. We're all aware at this point in the world. I think, we're all aware of what autism is to a certain extent, but we need more acceptance of what it actually looks like. And that's a journey that my husband and I had to go on ourselves, and something that we wish the rest of the world would do.
Yeah, there's a phrase in the disability world that we use. It's called super critics, right? I don't know if you're familiar, but it's in the disability rights world. It's the narrative of like the hero disabled person that like becomes, you know, an Olympic athlete
Mhm.
or, the savant with autism. And the danger of those narratives is a little bit is like, oh, you have to meet that expectation in order to be accepted. And it's like, well, everybody has inherent value. And so the acceptance needs to be there regardless.
Yes, absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head. The world has very much one view of autism or any disability, really. I think a lot of times people don't know what to do with somebody who's different. So somebody who's medically complex, maybe doesn't feel approachable to someone who's never been around someone like that. Um, and then obviously, if you see a child kicking, screaming, crying in the grocery store, we automatically assume like, oh, they're throwing a tantrum, not that it's a meltdown. And so these are all things that, we wish would change, I guess, is that people would have more acceptance of what it looks like when my son struggles in public, or, just what we go through in our own minds too, as his parents.
That really connects with me, Megan. This idea of giving each other grace, right? And assuming positive intentions. Um, my son does not have a diagnosis. He does not have autism. He is non speaking, and we have meltdowns just like somebody with autism might. Um, and when Zach talked about this idea of like you have to be somewhat exceptional in a way in order for like the mass population to see your inherent intrinsic value, right? Or you have to kind of like supersede and surpass the constructed version of what television and mass media has told you those disabilities are. It
Mhm.
just leaves you feeling so isolated and alone. And I
Mhm.
can only empathize with you and imagine how alone you must have felt moving to Iowa and just not having a village, not having a support system, not having a diagnosis, or probably access to in person therapy, right? In the heart of COVID.
Mhm.
So it leads me to better understanding of why building a support community for you was probably so important. Was there like a pinpoint singular moment where you said, I have to do something? And can you speak to that?
Yeah. Um, so I think just through we did build our own community through church and other supports, but they weren't specific to people with disabilities at all. Those friends, I would say, were exactly what I needed in that time because they were willing to sit with me while we went through the diagnosing process. So while they didn't maybe understand fully what was going on, they certainly observed it when we struggled with my son in a very public way, but they were gracious, and they were willing to sit with us, and that was special. However, it did lead me to want to be that for someone else. And I won't say that I've like come out on the other side of my autism journey as a parent at all because it's ever changing, you know. But I definitely feel like my husband and I, we had more capacity once we kind of understood this is what's needed. And so yeah, my close friend, her name is Valerie. We would meet in the school pickup lines. Her daughter was in the preschool class with the different teacher at the same time. And so we had kind of a couple interactions. We met at a different support group. And then we would spend all this time while we were waiting to pick up or after drop off, just kind of connecting at this level. And she was my first friend that had a special needs kid in Iowa. I definitely had friends back in Colorado that either had kids with disabilities or whatever else, and I just didn't know. You know, you don't know what you don't know. I wasn't there for them like I should have been, you know? And so Valerie, like I said, was kind of my first friend that was walking a very similar path. Now, her daughter obviously has different struggles, but we both had kids with autism diagnosed literally a day apart, which is kind of funny. Same office, a day apart. So we were kind of on the same timeline, if that makes sense. And we realized how huge we were in each other's lives. And I don't know how many times we got together and just were like, man, it'd be really great to have a support group, you know? Um, and so the pinpoint moment I like to say is we were taking a trip up to Stillwater, Minnesota to a book signing event by Kate Swenson. I don't know if you've heard of her or not yet from Finding Cooper's Voice. Her new book that came out, Autism Out Loud, with two other amazing moms as well. We went up there to do the book signing, the book launch party. And we did a little girls trip. And then we had our other friend with us. Her name is Joy. And her daughter as well is kind of on the same journey, a little bit more nonverbal than Valerie's daughter. But, here we have two girls who have the same diagnosis but look totally different. So the three of us, we kind of went on this path together of like, oh, what would we like to see in a support group, and what are we not getting out of what's already out there? And we had this very real moment in the car on the way back, I think it was from Stillwater, where I said, oh yeah, we really just need to get something started. And I believe it was Joy that was like, well, why not just start doing it, And so that was April of this past year, 2025. And so I went home and started planning and just was like, okay, what do we need to do to start a support group? And, went down a deep dive. And later that month, we had our first meeting and it exceeded my expectations. I would have been happy if just one person came, but I think we had about 10 parents our first meeting. And it's just grown over the summer and in the school year into something really cool. But yeah, kind of the backstory of Anchored Hearts. We wish we had.
I love that, Megan.
Just for clarification, is it anchored or anchored? So
Anchor, like
anchor,
anchor your heart. Like you need to be
that's what
grounded.
I thought.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Like helping each other be steadied in a storm, easy to drift off when you're not anchored. So that's where we came up
How
with it.
how has the support system done that for you?
What was that? Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
How has the support group done that for you?
Oh, yes. Okay, so this is very cool. Well, I'm at a point now where I get to kind of just sit back and watch it all happen, which is amazing. But I think in the beginning, it was just like I would bring questions or things that I was thinking about or struggling with, and another parent would be like, "Yeah, me too," Or, "Hey, I went through that a month ago, and here's what we did." And it goes beyond our own mental health and feelings, and it turned into like we're sharing resources back and forth. We're like, oh, I did this over here. I went through this nonprofit to help me get my accessible stroller, or I did, XYZ to, I went here and I advocated, and this is what happened. Or even just like we said, like knowing that this place has a changing table. And so we are that for each other, this group of parents. And it's really cool. I think the online Facebook group has a little over 100 people in it. We typically, when we meet, see anywhere from like 10 to 20 families, and it kind of is a, revolving door of like, core group of people kind of has stayed the same, but we add a few or, people, it ebbs and flows, I feel like, because that's the world of a special needs parent where like you get to the day of an event or a park meetup and something happens and you can't be there. And so there's a lot of grace for that. Obviously, nobody's talking about why you weren't there. We all just assume something happened. And so I think that's the good thing is that like it's so relatable because even though we're all walking these different, you know, journeys and all of our kids are different, there's enough similarity and solidarity too to say like, hey, we're just here to support you. You want to come and say like, I'm struggling with my kid's IEP, I don't understand something. We can say, hey, this is who we used. We went to Ask Resource Center or wherever else, and they helped us understand it. And so it's like a springboard. We're able to just bounce things off of each other. And I mean, there are no limits really either. We try to stay away from politics, but other than that, yeah, there are no limits to what we will talk about or bring up. And I think just having that safe space has been so huge.
I really think from my perspective as a mom uh, with a child who's disabled, there is nothing better than the recommendation of another parent with a disabled child, right? Somebody who's already vetted an experience or worked with a provider agency. That just gives me kind of lets my shoulders come down a little bit, and I don't have to feel quite so defensive maybe, or I don't feel that need for the hypervigilance and planning every aspect of everything because I just go in knowing that I can trust that information just that little bit more because it came from another mom with a child that's disabled. And I'm sure there's a lot of that goes on in your group, right? Where you can actually like viscerally see the people just the coming down and the letting go of the stress or the isolation. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about how you really helped families do a better job of supporting other families?
Yeah, so I think it it's a blessing to help other families, right? So if you can be a help to someone or share your perspective, it makes you feel better too. And so even though you may not have all the right answers, you can come and say, "Hey, I went to this therapy center over here. Here's my experience." And it feels good to know that you're not alone, but it also feels good to know that you're helping someone over here. And so I think we kind of fill in the gaps for each other in a beautiful way. We have like a private group me chat, and it's lighting up all day long because we all have questions all day long and we don't know where to put them. And sometimes we just have to kind of sit with it too. You know, we all say, yeah, you know, that's actually a really good question. We should talk about how we can solve that issue or that problem, or what we can do this different. What other alternatives are there? And so I just find myself in that group me chat all the time, just being like, you know, guys, I don't really have anything to add on this topic, but I'm just really glad we're all here.
You're creating that community, right? You're cultivating that acceptance. You're allowing that safe space for that dialogue to take place. And that's just so powerful. Um, and I just wish that we could have more of that in our community. You know, that's what we try to do here on I Am Able, is just to highlight the experiences that people with disabilities, their caregivers have on a daily basis. And so I just want to thank you for creating a safe space for other families to feel normalized, although I hate that term, um,
Yeah.
and accepted, right? And just not to feel so isolated.
Yeah, I mean, and you guys are doing it here too. I know when well, even before we got our diagnosis, you know, I was searching and researching so much and I overwhelmed myself quick because I didn't know where to look, you know? And so, you know, read every book on autism that I could get my hands on, listened to every podcast I could find that I thought might be helpful. And it's just, it's a lot, and you don't know where to look, and you don't know what you don't know. And that is just so exhausting. So, yeah, like you said, if you have a friend who can just say, hey, I did all that legwork 6 months ago, and here's what I found, it's like, okay, I can take a deep breath. Like, I can trust this maybe above what someone, you know, on Google says or whatever. And so, you know, that was really cool because I think as a special needs parent, you kind of go down this rabbit hole of like needing to solve all the problems all day long. And even when your kids go to sleep, you know, you're still solving problems. I did have a struggle with my own mental health about a year and a half ago, where my son was just experiencing a lot of aggression. And it was because he didn't have the means to communicate, you know, but it was a lot on my brain. So, you know, sought help, and the therapist very nicely told me one day, like, you need to do more for yourself. What are you doing? And I said, well, I read. And she said, well, what do you read? And I said, well, books about autism. You know, and she was like, well, that's not really a break. And so, like, I think that was just like such a real example of what special needs parents go through, and probably special needs individuals too. You know, anybody with a disability, I think, is probably always researching ways that they can get the help that they need. Or you're in a place mentally where you can't do it, and that's crippling, and you're hiding. You're in a hole or a cave. I mean, I think you can tell me, Nancy, if you've ever experienced this, but there are definitely times where you're so crippled by the amount of things that you think you need to advocate for or solve that you just fall off the radar. You fall down a hole for however long and you'll resurface eventually, but yeah, you have to turn it all off.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to I Am Able Iowa, and we're talking with Megan Hopper, mom of two children, a special needs advocate, interior designer, and founder of Anchored Hearts Support Group. Um, Megan, you hit it right on the head. I come home and I have decision making fatigue. I'm a public school teacher. You know, I serve on a number of different boards. I'm an involved, educated parent. But there are just times where I can't make any more decisions. I can't create any more backup plans, and I'm just physically, emotionally, cognitively exhausted. Um, it gives me a lot of perspective and empathy because I think that's what our kids are often also experiencing. And so I just want to bring that to the forefront, right? That notion that we all need a little more grace. We all need to recognize and be a little bit more humble, right? Practice that humility because we're all teetering on the edge on any given day or minute, depending on the situation. Um, so you've talked about a lot of different things, and I just wanted to kind of bring this back to this idea of physical spaces, whether they're spaces that are support group spaces or therapeutic spaces, and this passion that you have for interior design and this kind of environmental psychology of how it will um, impact inclusion ultimately, right? Because that's really what we're talking about is creating inclusive spaces, whether it's inclusive of the mind or actually physically inclusive, right? And I'm thinking a lot, my kid, your kid, they're young, but they're going to grow up and they're going to be Zach's age someday.
Mhm.
And they're going to want to be able to get out there into the workforce or the community. And so, what role do those physical spaces play, whether it's home or school or work or community, and really the well being of people with disabilities and their families?
Yeah, when you hear the term environmental psychology, I think a lot of people's mind goes to going green or something, right? Like environmental has that, I don't know, not connotation. That's not the right word. The association of like being more eco-friendly or whatever. And that's, not what it is really at all. But rather it's the psychology of the environment in the form of used and lived spaces. And so, yeah, there's a lot that could be said about, places that people with disabilities frequent, like medical offices and, well, schools, definitely, things like that. And we kind of touched on that a little earlier about like how we can design those spaces to be better. But I think, just taking some time to put yourself in their shoes is so important. And to asking them. That's something that like why is that not the first thing people think of, right? To okay, let's ask an adult with autism or somebody who's medically complex if they're able to communicate what would make it better. Ultimately, as a parent, like, yeah, I have my ideas and they're probably pretty good, but not as good as whatever my son could come up with if he could say it. So I think that is the biggest key would be, if you're designing a space, ask someone who, struggles with it, what would make it better. And I think that is a huge thing is like in the design process, that's not happening very often. Or maybe it is, but only to the required amount, right? And the spaces that are successful or are enjoyable for us as parents or families, are the ones that did take the time to consider those things. And even to do a little research too. I mean, do a case study, and figure out what's needed. Because, I certainly have my ideas, like I said, in the way of lighting and soundproofing and even just the way like the traffic flows in a space. I mean, there are so many instances where I go into a medical office and the first thing my son does is plop down on the floor and I'm right in the middle of the room where everybody's watching. So to have those moments where you can, tuck yourself away for a minute, moments of retreat to like be able to calm down, a enclosed room to be able to fill out the paperwork and not be chasing my kid, whatever else. Those are all things that like myself as a parent can comment on, and especially from my design mind. But ultimately, what I say is not as important maybe as the individual who struggles with it. So that's kind of what I would say as far as design spaces. And then as far as like from the workforce side of it, I think the same would still be true, right? You would still want to ask, hey, we would love to hire more people with disabilities, to bring more awareness and acceptance into the world, but we have no clue how to do that. What are some tasks that you're good at? And do you know what those things are? And if you do, how could we incorporate them in what we're doing already? A lot of times I think businesses have those tasks and jobs that are definitely, something someone with a disability could do. And two, a lot of them have strengths, like beyond just what are skills you have, like what are your strengths, and we would love to use them. So that would be the workforce part of it, I would say.
I think what you're talking about really broadly is being proactive, right? It's just proactively considering the needs of different people.
Yep.
And I think why that's so important, I know you two could probably speak on this better than I could, but like, I studied to be an educator. And one of the things that they hammered into my head is like the best classroom management strategy is a good lesson plan. Because
Mhm.
if your students are engaged, they're not acting out. Um, and so it's this idea of like, you eliminate problems. You don't, you, if you are proactive in considering people, particularly people with sensory needs, then you eliminate 100 problems before they ever even happen.
Yes, exactly. It's different planning. It should be included in the planning process, really. Um, And I get that there's time and budget constraints, but it's, for a lot of parents and kids, it's safety. So surely there's more that could be done to advocate for that part of it. Yeah.
And the planning, yes, it mitigates so many issues. But I would tell you the other thing that helps as a classroom teacher, other than a really great, well designed lesson, are relationships, right?
Mhm.
Relationships with my students, right? Having them receive my praise and not have it be disingenuous praise, right? But to actually to share with them, like, I'm so proud of you, right? That you did so well. Look how far you've come.
Mhm.
I couldn't do that when I started studying Spanish, but you can already write a paragraph. I
Mhm.
wish I could do that 2 months, 3 months into Spanish one, but I couldn't. And I think that that's the kind of dialogue that doesn't cost money, right? Asking questions
Mhm.
doesn't doesn't cost anything. Building relationships is a low invest no, how do I want it's a low expenditure with a high return on investment. That's how I
Mhm.
would say that. And so I think that that's what you're talking about.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. And so in that world, the workforce world, I guess we could get into a little bit of the rest of the Hope Foundation. So Anchored Hearts support is underneath Hope Foundation, Iowa, and they just do all kinds of different programming for special needs individuals and their families. So when we started looking in to becoming a 501c3 for Anchored Hearts, I was just kind of overwhelmed with the whole process. And my son's former teacher is the president of Hope Foundation and just kind of came to me and was like, hey, this is an area where we would like to fill a need of caring for families with smaller children. But we're already kind of doing teenagers, but we would love to see more care for the family as a whole, and it's particularly in that earlier phase. So it just kind of made sense for us to come underneath them. So that's how we ended up with Hope Foundation. That was just pretty recent in July. So Hope Foundation has been around for a long time. I believe it was 2008 is when they were founded, and they did fundraisers for different special needs, charities and things like that. So they would fundraise and then they would give the money to, whoever. And so that was mainly through a golf tournament. It was called Holes for Hope. And then they kind of just sat there for a while doing that. Through the years, they brought in Club 515, which is mainly for teenagers and young adults, and it's a social program. So they go and do things like bowling, the pool, go see a play, things like that. And it's great. And they operate through like a private Facebook group. So they had that going, and then recently in April, they started their job skill training program, which is Cups of Kindness, is what it's called. And there's this cute little food trailer named Millie. She's black and white, and she's beautiful. We love her. She's about to get tucked away for the season, but yeah, we had a busy summer, just kind of figuring out what this job training program will look like. Typically, what we do is we have one person who kind of manages the trailer and that flow, and then we have a job coach, and then we have two or three kids that kind of work the trailer, and we play to their strengths, right? So if we know one kid is going to be really good at being social and asking questions, we're going to put them towards the front and let them engage with people, right? If there's a kid who's more task oriented, they're going to be completing tasks, in that way. So we get to go on this journey with the kids of figuring out what their strengths are. And then I think, on down the line, we would love to see, us send them to the next step. What is the next thing? What other resource in Iowa could benefit you next? You know what your strengths are. Do you go straight into the workforce, or do you need additional, job training? Because there are programs that are out there. But it's a matter of like the connection and having kind of that baseline of like, well, I'm a parent and I would love to see what my kid can handle, but I don't necessarily want to go through all the hoops. Hope Foundation has kind of bridged that gap of like providing volunteer opportunities. And I think, we would love to be able to pay our kids someday. We're not to that point yet, but that is definitely the goal, to be able to pay them something. But it's an opportunity to kind of get your feet wet and figure out like where your kid is. We love when parents and kids volunteer together. That's been a really special thing to watch, kind of that relationship form. But that's not like a deal breaker either. We love to just have the kids show up and help. So a lot of what they do is we go to businesses, we partner with businesses to do things like corporate lunches. But we've definitely done special events too. Over the summer, for example, we did like the skateboarding competition downtown Des Moines. And that one was really great. And we've done other things too, like Valley Church, we just wrapped up with their Great Pumpkin Party. It was a 5-day event. We were there every night. And so it's a really beautiful thing that's happening where, Anchored Hearts is kind of providing community on the back end a little bit, as well as sharing resources. And then you have this very forward-facing Cups of Kindness ministry that's able to kind of meet a different need. But in a way, we're also all kind of doing the same thing, right? Just in a different approach. So that's kind of Hope Foundation, in a long story long, I guess. So yeah.
But I think that that's great. We need these resources. And you're right to identify that some young adults need pre vocational training before they're ready to implement vocational training.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think,
And go
uh,
ahead.
no, no, go ahead. You're the guest. I
No,
don't want to
yeah,
interrupt you.
yeah. I was just gonna say, yeah, I think it's just a nice step that doesn't feel quite as daunting, right? To like just be involved with something on a smaller scale before going through all the bigger, scarier process of vocational training. Yeah.
And I think about, when I grew up as a disabled kid, and like, I'm relatively articulate, right? And so like, whether or not I am smart, I always sounded smart, right? And still, people uh, would like have such low expectations of me just because of the way I look. So like, having an opportunity like this for kids on the autism spectrum might be exposing them for the first time of like, hey, if you want to have a job, that could be within your grasp. You know, you can do something and ignore the voices that you're hearing that other people are telling you that you can't because they don't know what they're talking about.
I love that.
And we need more of that dialogue, right? We need more of these kind of stopgap programs and opportunities for families like ours. Um, because when you talk about a project search or a reach program that are offered through our universities here in Iowa,
Mhm.
those are great programs, but you have to have a certain number of prerequisite skills that you've already acquired to be able to participate in those programs. And while our state has done a lot of great things to try to minimize wait lists for vocational programming and job coaching, the reality is that those there is still a wait, right? And
Mhm.
so what to do in the meantime? And this feels kind of like vocational training light, right? To get your feet wet, to do it at a pace that feels comfortable and manageable for your family, and to not just build confidence with the person, but to build confidence as a family that we can manage this and we can go to this next level. Because as Zach, you said, the low expectations. Oftentimes, those low expectations, we're all indoctrinated in some way, having been kind of brainwashed by our society. And we really have to rip those blinders off and say, no, we don't really know the possibilities because we've never really tried.
Mhm.
And until we all try, we can't really answer what the future holds for someone.
Right. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like the false media representations, right? it's like depending on what your exposure is, right? Like if you find out your child is going to be on the autism spectrum, you either expect them to either A, not be able to do anything, or B, be able to win you a bunch of money at the casino. And like the odds are, it's probably neither of those far ends of the spectrum, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And what about, everybody in between? Yeah. Um, and so, yeah, I think it just, the more you're able to put kids with disabilities in front of the general public, the better it can be. And it's been cool too to see businesses care so much about it and be so loyal to Cups of Kindness in such a short amount of time. Like to say, no, we're going to come alongside you, we're going to donate the ice cream or we're going to donate this or that so that your kids, it goes back into the foundation. Your kids get to learn more. And that's just been so cool to see that like those businesses are out there. And we started local, like most of our businesses are local businesses who probably had to advocate for what they needed or wanted to do in a certain way, and so they get it. But that's just been cool to see that like, okay, it is out there. People do care and people want to know what they're supposed to do too. And that's something that like I don't think I realized going into this parenthood journey is that like it's not that people don't care most of the time. It's that they don't know what to do. They observe something happening in public and they don't know what to do with it. They maybe never seen it before because there's not this awareness and acceptance happening enough. So I think, the more we can ask, what can we do, the better it will get, hopefully.
Right. Well, and I think opportunities like this as well that get individuals with disabilities out into the public eye as their authentic selves helps to
Mhm.
create a more nuanced perception of what it means to be disabled.
Absolutely. I think back to just a couple days ago, we did an event at Iowa State. And it was just so cool because I had this whole speech thing that I presented about what Hope Foundation is about. But ultimately, I think what people remembered was we had this young girl with Down syndrome come and speak about her job. Like she just got up there and told everybody what she did with Cups of Kindness, what she liked about it. And I'm like, it really doesn't matter a whole lot what I say because we got her there and she's doing it. And at the end of the day, like we ended with that. And that's what people are going to remember now is like, oh my gosh, that sweet girl who did so good at her job. Um, that's what people need to see more of is those things. And so
And
it's
her
just,
voice needs elevated, right? Her
yeah.
story needs elevated.
Hmm.
That because her voice is the one that oftentimes is probably the one that's marginalized or diminished or discounted, or as Zach has even said before, when someone else tells your story, they rob you of your autonomy and your own power.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the more opportunities to replace that autonomy, like you said, the better. And that's true in the whole environmental psychology thing again, too. So, always bringing it back to that. But yeah, so it's just an amazing program. And I'm thrilled to share about all of this with you guys. Just thankful for the opportunity and I guess the platform to be able to elevate more people who need elevated.
So, where can people learn about these great programs? Do you guys have a website? Do you have you mentioned a Facebook page. We just have just a couple minutes left. So, for our listeners out there, they want to know how to find Cups of Kindness to book them for their next event, or they want to be a part of the Hope Foundation of Iowa, or just want to check out your support group. Where can they go to find all that?
Sure. So the easiest way is probably social media for most people. Look up Cups of Kindness on Facebook. Club 515 and Anchored Hearts are both private Facebook groups for obvious reasons. We're support groups in a way. So a good springboard is either Cups of Kindness Facebook page or the website, which is the Hope Foundation Iowa.org. And yeah, you can go there and see more about what I've talked about today, but to just kind of get a little feel for what it is we do. And yeah, that'd probably be the easiest ways. Yeah, the website.
And in just a brief 30 seconds to a minute, as you look ahead and you think about all your hopes and dreams for these programs, Cups of Kindness, Anchored Hearts, even your own personal advocacy, um, what do you wish? What do you hope for?
I think I would just say the growing awareness thing. We've talked about it a lot today, but yeah, I think just the more people would be willing to ask questions too. Maybe not necessarily when your kid's having a meltdown in the store, coming up and saying, "How can I help?" But if you see somebody, and they appear to be calm or it's a good approachable time to say, hey, I don't know how to interact with your kid. How can I learn? Or I don't know what accommodations I can make if you come over to my house, those types of things. And asking how you can help and be a part. Obviously, getting more involved through volunteering at many of the nonprofits that are out there helping individuals with disabilities. I think, yeah, it's that exposure. If you have a growing interest in this whole world, go out there and find it.
Megan, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today on I Am Able. I really enjoyed this conversation and I loved hearing so much about these programs. This is KHOI, Story City Ames, and you've been listening to I Am Able Iowa. I Am Able Iowa airs the first and last Saturday morning of each month at 9 a.m. on KHOI 89.1 FM. You can also hear us streaming live online at khoifm.org. We invite you to share your comments, questions, and program ideas with us at doug@thearcofiowa.org. And if you visit www.thearcofiowa.org, you can find previous episodes and more information about our program. I Am Able Iowa is produced by the Arc of Iowa, headquartered in West Des Moines, Iowa, with local chapters here in Ames and across the state. Thank you for listening, and until next time, this is Nancy Baker Curtis and Zach Meekum saying, You Are Able, Iowa.